Early in 2026, I was contacted by the producer of a television program on the resurrection of Jesus he and Chris Cuomo were putting together. Shortly after, I was flown to New York City, where Princeton professor Dale Allison and I were interviewed by Chris. The ensuing special, The Mystery of Easter, aired over the Easter weekend on News Nation. That special is now available to view on News Nation's YouTube channel. I also make it available for you to view here. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Tonight,
the dead will be risen.
We're investigating history's greatest mystery, the resurrection of Jesus. Did it really happen?
People don't rise from the dead.
Was it just a legend or a lie?
Well, I think it's both, fact and faith.
We're sifting through the evidence.
Darkness, there's an earthquake, the dead are raised.
Exploring the theories.
These stories are really strange.
And returning with exclusive access to the places where Jesus is believed to have walked, died,
and his body could have been left there,
and to have risen again.
The most amazing event in human history occurred right here, perhaps? That's pretty cool.
This is the mystery of Easter. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ may be the most powerful story in history. And whatever happened started right here in Jerusalem. That's why we call it the Holy City. But what do we really know that informs our faith? That's the question that we set out to answer right now. Sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike, Jerusalem's old city is as inspiring as it is ancient.
We look upon the walls of old Jerusalem, walls which have been destroyed and rebuilt many times.
But the truth of what really happened to Jesus here is not easy to find. It lies buried beneath millennia of interpretation and layers of rock. Anyone looking to unlock the mystery of Easter needs a guide. So the first thing we did was find one. The Reverend Dr. Petra Helt teaches early Christianity here at the Hebrew University.
Jerusalem is really the center of the world.
And is certainly home to the most powerful story in the history of mankind, which is the story of Jesus, specifically his death and resurrection.
Now, traditional Christians insist the Easter miracle is more than a story.
It had to have happened because it was the promise that the faith is based on.
Yes, this is central and it's historical. And if we discover that it's not, well, then we're in trouble.
The resurrection certainly needed to happen because Jesus, while on earth, claimed to be God's uniquely divine Son. So if Jesus did not rise from the dead, he's a false prophet whom no rational person should follow.
Biblical scholars Michael Licona and Dale Allison Jr. have both written impressive books called, you guessed it, The Resurrection of Jesus. But while their titles are the same, their conclusions are quite different.
Do you believe that the resurrection can be justified as a point of history?
No, I don't think it can be established that way.
The case for the resurrection of Jesus, in my opinion, is pretty solid.
But even those who believe the evidence is solid don't argue that it's abundant. Yes, there are the resurrection narratives in the four Gospels, but they diverge on many of the details. Plus, they were written decades after the assumed fact. Actually, the earliest known written account of the resurrection appears in the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians.
For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures.
We would ideally want interviews with the people back there in AD 30 or 33 when all this supposedly happened, but that's just not what we have.
The skeptics have modern science and our everyday experience on their side, of course, but they still have to explain how an enduring world religion emerged from the extraordinary claim that a first-century Jewish peasant rose from the dead. And as we'll see, that might not be so easy. Let's start with the skeptical claim that Jesus was a myth. After all, the life, death, and rebirth of Jesus aligns with several other heroic mythical figures, from the Egyptian Osiris to the Greek Hercules. So, why shouldn't the Easter story and its supernatural elements be dismissed as just another myth?
Do you believe that there is an objective truth about whether Jesus was, in fact, a man?
Oh, yes. I mean, we have evidence that Jesus was alive, he was a man, he was teaching, he was healing.
This wasn't just a myth. He existed.
Absolutely. We have a number of non-Christian sources early on who mention Jesus as a historical person. Josephus, Jewish historian, 1st century. Tacitus, Roman historian, early 2nd century. So, yeah, you got non-Christians who, in antiquity, who mention him relatively close to Jesus.
Those non-Christian historians agree. Jesus lived, he had followers, and he was crucified.
Jesus is a real person, and if he were not a real person, people would not have cared about him.
The archaeological record also indicates that other characters in the story really existed. Here at the Israel Museum, senior curator David Mavorak showed us this ossuary. It's a bone box inscribed with the name of Caiaphas. He was the Jewish high priest who plots Jesus' death. And here is a 1st century column inscribed with the name of Pontius Pilate, the Roman official who condemned Jesus to the cross.
This is a fantastic testimony to the existence of this very notorious guy. So we have the two bad guys from the story of the trial and crucifixion of Jesus on our archaeological artifacts, which is something we rarely have for other historical figures.
Threading its way laboriously toward the place called Golgotha is the Via Dolorosa, the Street of Sorrow.
The word means incredible pain or suffering. It's known as the way of sorrow. Why?
Well, because Jesus was made to carry his cross to the crucifixion.
We walked with Professor Helt along the Via Dolorosa, traditionally venerated as the path that Jesus walked with his cross.
We pass under this one arch that is bigger than the others, and there is such heavy significance to this because?
Because it is the place where Pontius Pilate came out and said, Ecce homo, see what a man, about Jesus. You know, he interrogated Jesus and can't find any guilt on him. And then he said, look at this man, Ecce homo.
But this has these commemorative moments along it, and we are now at one of the most powerful ones, if not the most powerful.
Yeah, here we are at an indent in the stone, and you see it fits like a hand. And so the idea is that Jesus here again, he had so much suffering from the burden, and he can't continue walking any longer. I think it is worn by time, and people put their hands here.
Wow,
and
literally wore away the stone.
Yeah, it is really very, very powerful.
It's funny, when you're explaining this to me, your cheeks get red. They do, you get flushed with emotion about it.
Yeah, but you know, it's also something else. When you are praying, you are filled with the Holy Spirit.
Is that what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks be to God.
I need to touch the rock then.
Go ahead.
Amazing that it's been worn down by so many different people looking to tap in, you know?
Powerful, yes, but historically accurate? That's debatable.
I mean, it has a lovely history, but nobody knows that that's the route that Jesus would have taken. It doesn't belong to history.
Today, most scholars actually believe Jesus would have walked a different path to the spot of his crucifixion on Golgotha, the place of the skulls. It's an issue that plagues this whole town. Sites that have been attracting the faithful for centuries might not be these sites where the actual events took place. So where was Jesus really crucified? For that answer, we went straight to the authority.
Hello, brother.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Father. How are you?
Father Marwan Didas, a Franciscan monk, helps maintain the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus is said to have been crucified, buried, and resurrected.
How confident to you and how important is it to you that the Holy Sepulchre is the place?
To know that it is the place, you have to study a little bit of geography, archaeology, and history, and you know that it is the place.
He's right about that, at least part of it. The consensus academic opinion is that Jesus was crucified right here.
I think there's a real good chance that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is on the right spot.
It's important. You know, faith is something that you feel in your heart, in your mind, but it's something also that you need to touch. If you don't touch practical parts of your faith, you're missing something.
We were granted exclusive access to the church, and while we entered with reverence, we didn't leave our critical thinking at the door. You're taking me through the markers of what you believe demonstrate that this is the place.
Well, I don't only believe it, but I can see it and I can verify it archaeologically. Jesus was put on the cross. He was crucified here. He was stripped naked. He was nailed and bound to the cross.
And you believe that this marks the spot?
And this marks the spot. It is under the altar of the Greek Orthodox part of this church. And when you put your hand into this part here, it goes up to the elbow, and then you are touching, so to speak, the place where the cross was rammed in.
And what do I feel? What is this stone? This is the post.
This is where the post of the
This was the stepping for the cross, right here.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. It really is something to put your hand on the exact spot where even most skeptics agree Jesus was crucified. But as for what happened next, that is very much in dispute.
We are standing at the Stone of Unction. The cross is over there. Jesus was crucified. According to the Jewish law, he had to be buried. So he was taken up from the cross and put on a stone of unction. And it was in the garden, all this is a garden of Joseph of Arimathea.
The faithful believe Jesus' body was taken by a wealthy Jewish man named Joseph of Arimathea, prepared for burial, and in accordance with Jewish law, immediately placed in a tomb that is now marked by this sacred shrine and revered as the Holy Sepulchre. But hold on, in recent years, some scholars have argued that Jesus wasn't really buried here. In fact, he wasn't buried at all. Another argument is that people who were crucified were dishonored, and they were not given burial. So Jesus would not have wound up where we believe he wound up.
Yeah, so in antiquity, you're correct that the Romans typically did not allow a crucified or a condemned person who had been executed by them to receive a proper burial. But the Romans, in order to keep peace with people they had conquered, would often allow them to maintain some of their customs. And we have evidence that they did this in Jerusalem.
That evidence includes this fascinating first century find back at the Israel Museum.
This very simple ossuary, bone box, was found in a tomb in Jerusalem. The surprise was when the skeleton was found, the bones of a young man about 28 years old, and the heel bone of the young man had a huge iron nail driven through it.
So we can say for sure that at least some crucified criminals were given proper burials. And since Jesus wasn't some anonymous thief, but a celebrated and controversial figure, it does make sense that his followers would make sure his body wasn't just thrown in a ditch.
After he's dead, they're going to care about what happened to him. And so some of them are going to know that he was buried here at a certain place.
But is this really that certain place? And did Jesus really leave it empty on the third day?
Take me in.
Let's go.
That's next, when the mystery of Easter continues. There's strong reason to believe that this shrine, known as the Holy Edicule, is the true burial site of Jesus. For one thing, just a few yards away, you can see other first-century Jewish tombs.
And why does it matter that there are tombs here?
Well, it is in close proximity to the tomb of Jesus.
And it makes sense that this is the kind of place where Joseph of Arimathea would have been able to have a tomb.
Absolutely.
May I go inside?
Please.
All right, here we come inside. Here's one tomb, two tombs.
And on top of that, literally, there's the fact that the 2nd century Roman emperor, Hadrian, built a pagan temple right here. Why would he do that?
Hadrian hated the Christians. He didn't want to have, the Christians, they were Jews, believing in the Messiah.
So you know the place that he thought he needed to destroy is the right place.
Absolutely. And what's more, he tried to destroy the grave.
Take me in.
Well, let's go. And here we are in the Holy of Holies.
You believe that this spot within this area may have actually been the resting place?
Absolutely.
But hang on, there are those who've made the case that Jesus wasn't buried here, but here, where the construction of this new residential neighborhood called Talpiot turned up this very old discovery.
They found this burial tomb that bore very interesting names.
So what was discovered in here was a group of 10 ossuaries, bone boxes. Now, one of these ossuaries has the name Jesus Bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph. Okay, so that's our guy from the New Testament, right? One of them also has Mary on the side of it.
And perhaps the most sensational of those Talpiot ossuaries is this one, on display at the Israel Museum.
So this is a super common ossuary. The inscription, however, is intriguing. It says, Yehuda bar Yeshua, or Judah, the son of Jesus.
And maybe since Jesus here has a son, maybe the Mary is his wife, and it's kind of Dan Brown come true. Jesus married Mary Magdalene and they had a son.
The theory first emerged in 2007, but it hasn't aged well for two main reasons.
The family was from Galilee. There's no way that we can think that the whole family would have this big schlep from Galilee to Jerusalem to bury their people. What's more, the inscriptions of the 10 ossuaries, they all show very, very common names, like Miriam, Mary, or Joseph, and Yeshua, Yehoshua. These are all names you can find by the dozens all over the place.
And you have to remember, as Christianity took hold and gained followers, it also gained enemies. If any of its opponents, Jewish, Roman, whomever, knew that the upstart religion's resurrected Messiah was actually in a bone box in a family tomb, wouldn't they have produced those bones to debunk the whole story?
All that you would have had to do is have the Romans open the tomb and go in and see any kind of a corpse that had any kind of resemblance to Jesus whatsoever. And it's going to make it extremely difficult for the proclamation that Jesus was raised to spread.
That's why most scholars agree that Jesus' tomb was right here, and that, like the story says, it was indeed empty on Easter morning. The question then becomes, why was it empty? How had the stone been rolled away? There is no shortage of skeptical theories there. The most widely held is that Jesus' body was stolen.
We know that there were, whatever you want to call them, witches, sorcerers, magicians in the ancient world who went after body parts, especially body parts of people who had died violently or untimely. Now, what's so strange is we have some collections of magical papyri from the ancient world, and some of these have recipes which include parts of dead people, and some of the recipes demand that you have a piece of a person who died violently. So this is a real thing. We also know from antiquity, from inscriptions, that people would put on tombs, God will curse you if you touch anything or take anything out of here or move these bodies, anything like that. There are lots of these inscriptions. So people messed with bodies, and people did take body parts. So if I were an atheist, if I were a skeptic, I'd say, well, why was the tomb empty? Well, Jesus died, and he had died violently, and he was a holy person. People revered him as this important person. So, you know, I'd like some of him in my recipes. And I'm going to steal the body, and I'm going to go in the middle of the night, right? And I'm going to roll the stone away, and then I'm going to be in a hurry, and I'm going to leave. So the tomb's going to be empty, right? And the stone is going to be rolled away.
At the time, people used to steal bodies. How do you deal with that in terms of a possibility of Jesus' own disappearance?
Well, I mean, robbers came and looking for valuable things, something they could make money of. To steal a whole body, especially a body that is 2-3 days old, is very heavy. The water is still in the body and very heavy to carry.
And yet, a variation of the grave robbing argument actually pops up in the Gospel of Matthew. In this version, the chief priests spread the story Jesus' body wasn't stolen by sorcerers for use in magic potions, but by his own disciples to promote the hoax that their Messiah had conquered death.
Tell them his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. This text indicates that there was a rumor that the disciples had stolen Jesus' body.
Why could that have not been the case here?
Well, of course, if you want to cover the story, the real story, and you are using some invented story as written in the Bible, as written in the Gospel, yes, it bothers me. But at the end of the story, history talks for itself. So you can't change history. Even with a big lie, you can't change history. They said whatever they said, but Jesus has risen from here, and we're still remembering him.
But Professor Helt isn't bothered by that theory. She points to the same chapter of Matthew which says there were guards placed at the tomb, making a hoaxed resurrection impossible.
He is buried in the place of a rich man, and this place probably was very well guarded. And if they would see that somebody is coming to steal them, they would immediately be taken into custody.
But the skeptics aren't done. One scholar has published a paper advancing another theory for the empty tomb. It was empty because of an earthquake.
In the Gospel of Matthew, there's an earthquake on Easter morning, big earthquake, and that's what rolls away the stone. But a skeptic could say, well, the ground opened up and the body was in there and the body tumbled in and the ground went back up. And so that's how we get our body missing.
Anything is possible, right? Historians have to look at probabilities. So you could say, all right, there's a massive earthquake, it opened up the tomb and swallowed the body up, but is there really any kind of evidence? Is there any other reason why I should believe that?
The earth shook. It is said in Matthew's reckoning of the event of the crucifixion.
Okay. When you come to Matthew, we have 6 phenomena. Darkness, there's an earthquake, the rocks split, the tombs are open, the dead are raised. Now my take on that is at least some of those phenomena are Matthew adding them as, let's say, special effects. These portents are added as special effects.
How do you deal with that when you know that there are aspects of the story, the earthquake, the supernatural events that may have been done to impress a certain audience? Well, then maybe the whole thing is designed to impress.
Because I compare different texts, and what I see is that all the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all speak about the same facts. Jesus was crucified, Jesus died on the cross, he was buried, and he was risen. This is a core story.
So, case closed? Not by a long shot, because the skeptics have more intriguing theories you don't want to miss. Could it be Jesus never died to begin with?
Are you open to the idea that that's the explanation? And they put him in there, but he wasn't dead.
Stay with us.
Welcome to the Garden Tomb.
Wow.
It's a very special place.
Despite all the evidence pointing to the Holy Sepulchre as the place where it all happened, there is a Protestant tradition that claims Jesus was really crucified and buried here, in a totally different location known as the Garden Tomb. Head guide Cesar Fleitas took us on an exclusive tour of the place that he believes is the real location of the crucifixion.
The first element that drew people to the place had to do with what people saw when they came here, the resemblance of a skull. Now, it is in this area of the rock face where you can identify what people saw when they came here.
As for the tomb, even though the academics almost unanimously agree that this place was not being used for burials in the first century, Cesar and other Protestant believers are holding firm.
And we could just go in.
Absolutely. Just mind your head over here when you go inside. The burial places would have had stone shelves, and the body would have been placed here for the preparation.
Every time you come in, does that still overwhelm you?
Absolutely, because of what it meant and what it means to me today. The significance of the cross, that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the creator of heaven and earth, he came in the form of a man, in the form of a servant. He became obedient even to the point of death on a cross. And his body could have been left right there. But also, he rose from the dead, right? He could have been risen from the dead from this very tomb that we're in.
But the skeptics keep coming up with natural explanations for why Jesus' tomb, wherever it was found empty. Some have even argued that Jesus couldn't have risen again because Jesus didn't really die.
It's not completely crazy. We do know that even in the modern world, sometimes people are pronounced dead and they wake up afterwards.
In fact, it happened just last year when this grandmother in Thailand who'd been declared dead came back to life inside her own coffin shortly before her scheduled cremation.
So this happens. It happened in the ancient world. It's theoretically possible.
That's why he wasn't there, because he shook it off and he left.
Rub a little dirt on it, right? Look, we can posit possibilities, but historians have to go with probabilities. You've got Jesus who had been scourged, which was a very brutal process. Then a person was hung up on a cross. They had been weakened by the scourging. It was very difficult to breathe.
And of course, there is the stabbing of Jesus while on the cross.
Yeah, exactly. It is. These people who crucified him, they were professional executioners. They were supposed to take a person off the cross only after this person had died.
Even if Jesus had survived, what would he look like just a couple of days later? He would not convince them he was the risen Prince of Life. Alive, yes. Risen, not a chance. So the historian must conclude that Jesus was crucified and the process killed him.
Another exotic explanation for the empty tomb comes from a phenomenon that's been documented among Tibetan monks. It's called accelerated decomposition.
And there's a very old tradition that certain masters who have reached a state of sanctity will, upon death, dissipate. You can go on the internet and see a couple of what look like shrunken corpses, right? Other times they just leave some hair and fingernails, and then other times everything is gone.
The conditions were such that he decayed at a very rapid rate, and that is why they didn't really find anything meaningful in the tomb.
Well, we do have some accounts of some Buddhist monks, shamans, who seem to decay quickly, called rainbow bodies. But over a 2 or 3 day period, and then it's gone, there's not a single example of anything like that.
It sounds preposterous, right? But if you're a Christian and think Jesus rose from the dead, you probably don't have the right to say, well, that's just ridiculous, because things like that don't happen.
But conservative scholars like Professor Licona say the case for the resurrection is built on much, much more than just an empty tomb.
What's the strongest evidence?
The appearances. It was the appearances that really made the difference.
Stay with us.
Very early on the first day of the week, They came to the tomb. Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large.
The resurrection originates with the accounts of people who witnessed it. Of course, there are multiple versions of the story in the Bible and some disagreement about where this all happened.
It happened, but we don't know exactly where. So this is why we have so many different altars there in the Holy Sepulchre.
But everyone agrees, after the disciples had fled, it was Mary Magdalene and other women who first discovered the rolled stone and the empty tomb.
The women went out and running to the apostles and said, listen, guys, Jesus is not dead. He is risen.
And two of the Gospels, Mark and John, have Jesus appearing individually to Mary Magdalene first.
And Jesus said, Mary. And immediately she recognized the voice. So he meets us where we are, and he calls us by name.
Why does it matter that he appeared to Mary Magdalene?
Well, first of all, she was a woman. She loved him. She didn't run away like the disciples, like the men. She showed courage. She was there.
And conservative scholars argue there is historical truth to this story for an interesting reason.
Women were lowly regarded in the first century, both by Jews and by the Greeks and Romans. If you're going to invent a story about an empty tomb and a risen Jesus, why would you come up with your primary witnesses being women whom nobody's going to really give any kind of credibility to?
Mary Magdalene is not a spectacular figure in the early church. It's kind of weird to say, okay, she's the one that was really there for that.
In other words, Mary's prominence in the story didn't help the early Christian case. So the only reason to include her was because it actually happened. Our investigation into Jesus' appearances takes us west of Jerusalem, a place called Emmaus Nicopolis, where two disciples are said to have met the risen Jesus, and where we met Brother Anton.
This place has always been important for Christians because of the beautiful story of the two disciples meeting Jesus on the road.
Was it just a story, you think?
First of all, it's a very touching story. It's very emotional because the two disciples are very sad because Jesus died. And then they meet Jesus. They don't recognize him immediately, but finally he changes their sorrow into joy.
The Emmaus story is remarkable because you have people who knew Jesus who say they didn't recognize him when they first saw him. What do you make of that?
The disciples not only are with Jesus on the Emmaus Road, but they're talking to him, and they still don't know who he is, right? These stories are really strange. They're really strange.
This strangeness bolsters one of the most popular and enduring skeptical arguments today, that the appearances were hallucinations.
And why is it important that it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a ghost that came to all of these different disciples and other people of value in the religion? Why?
Because we are speaking about the bodily resurrection. This is the hope of Israel. This is always what the Jews were waiting for the bodily resurrection.
If it's so important that they can testify to the risen Jesus, why does he make it so difficult?
Well, at Emmaus, they saw him.
But they didn't know who he was?
That was
then they
two...
say, let's get something to eat, and all of a sudden, it's Jesus. Why
Exactly.
can't he just come and say, hello, fellas, remember me?
Because Jesus is taking all of us on our road towards him. And he wants us to understand that he is a Messiah. He's not just saying, you have to believe, but he wants to convince.
According to the Gospel of John, Jesus also appeared to his disciples while they were hiding in the locked upper room of a house. Could that have been a mass hallucination too?
It appears that Jesus can pop in and out of rooms, right? Okay, that's not ordinary. And by the way, that tells me he doesn't have an ordinary body because you, with your body, can't pop in and out of rooms, right? So there's something weird going on here.
Power of belief, very strong. People seeing things, hearing things. We hear stories of it all the time with departed loved ones. Why would this be different?
The fact is, yeah, it does happen. It happened with my dad a few months after my mom died.
My sisters say the same thing with my father. One time I was talking about him and there was a crack of thunder. That's it. How do you distinguish it from what these disciples who love Jesus He was central to their idea of what matters in life and death, that they would have believed what they attested to of seeing him.
So multiple studies that have been done over more than a century have revealed that the group most likely to experience a hallucination are people grieving the loss of a loved one. Approximately 50% of them do. However, only 14% experience a visual hallucination. Number two, because hallucinations are private occurrences in the mind of an individual with no external reality, you can't experience a group simultaneous hallucination. So you'd have to propose that these guys all had hallucinations simultaneously, and the content of those was so similar that they all thought they saw the same thing. That's not really plausible.
One biblical encounter explicitly makes the case that Jesus had been resurrected in body. He wasn't just a spirit, real or imagined. That is the famous Doubting Thomas moment in the Gospel of John.
Then he said to Thomas, "Reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing." And Thomas answered Jesus and said to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." I think people outside the church are doubting this, yeah. There must have been people who said, oh, they're just seeing things, right? And I think you can see that counter-narrative reflected in the Gospels because I think they are addressing it.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying they wouldn't have addressed the skepticism if they felt there was no power to the skepticism?
Ah, well, I wouldn't have put it that way, but yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, you only answer objections that you're worried about.
What do you make of the suggestion of the doubting Thomas?
Well, I think that for me, this is a true story. Thomas is somebody we know that he has his own mind. He's not swallowing Jesus. And the disciples are not just blindly following Jesus. They have their own minds.
That could be the case, but solid evidence still eludes us. And modern psychology seems to be on the side of the skeptic.
It's a normal part of the mourning process to see dead loved ones. I know this happened to me once. I had a friend who died, and 3 days later she ostensibly woke me up in the middle of the night, and there she was at the end of my bed. But if you're a skeptic, you could just say, well, all such things are visions or hallucinations. So we've got an empty tomb, and then we've got some hallucinations, and maybe that's enough to get the ball rolling, and then the details and the stories come later. They're just, legendary and so on.
But it's one thing to see something that confirms your existing beliefs. It's another to see something so powerful, it completely changes your life. Coming up, 2 late conversion experiences that might just make the case for the resurrection. The Christ-hating Paul.
I mean, you think about it, that would be more like the Ayatollah over in Iran converting to Christianity and telling everybody, you need to repent.
And Jesus' skeptical brother, James.
What would it take to convince you that your brother is the Lord?
You threw me with that one. You had me right until there, Professor.
Stay with us. The skeptics say that it's no surprise Jesus' followers claim to have seen him after his death. For one thing, they were grieving. For another, they wanted, even needed, the resurrection to be true for their lives to make sense. But what do we do with the original skeptic, who suddenly became an ardent believer, the Apostle Paul himself?
Paul's not grieving Jesus' death. Paul believed Jesus was a failed Messiah and a false prophet, so he would have been the last person in the universe that Paul would have expected to see or wanted to see.
Remember, Paul was not one of the original 12 disciples. He began as a zealous Jewish Pharisee, dedicated to stamping out the upstart Christian sect.
Paul he persecuted the Christians, and he was on his way to Damascus to kill and to persecute more Christians. And then suddenly he has this vision. He didn't look for a vision. He didn't want to have a hallucination. He didn't want to have anything. He just wanted to do his job.
And all of a sudden he's got an experience he believes is the risen Jesus appearing to him. And now he's out aggressively, proactively proclaiming the faith he once sought to destroy. Something happened there.
Do you remember Paul?
Yes.
St. Paul?
Yep, that is a good example.
He was one who said, never, I mean, these people are crazy.
He worse than you.
And then suddenly, boom, his whole life completely changed. He gave up everything for Jesus, everything, up to his death.
I mean, you think about it, that would be more like the Ayatollah over in Iran converting to Christianity and telling everybody, you need to repent.
Another compelling conversion experience happens within Jesus' own family to his brother James. He was doubtful and dismissive of Jesus, but after the crucifixion, Paul writes, Jesus appeared to James, and that changed everything.
He becomes a faithful disciple of Jesus. He gave up everything he had before, left the family, and he became the leader of the early church.
James becomes a leader of the Jerusalem church and is martyred. So the question, Chris, is what led James to change? What would it take to convince you that your brother is the Lord?
You threw me with that one. You had me right until there, Professor.
Now, the skeptics say there's really no evidence causally connecting James's conversion to his encounter with the risen Jesus.
I don't know if he saw Jesus before or after he converted. He could have become a believer after Easter for some reason or other, and then seen Jesus.
But the bigger point is this: just because someone believes in something so fervently that they're willing to die for it doesn't make it true. After all, the 9/11 hijackers believed they'd be granted 72 virgins in heaven after their so-called martyrdom. Does their conviction convince you they were right?
Sincerity doesn't prove the truth of something, because people are sincere about all sorts of things.
But it is a factor. If you have a lot of people who are saying they saw the same thing, they've had the same experience, and there is a price for saying that, doesn't it have to mean something?
Well, it has to mean something. Doesn't mean it's literally true, what they believe in. Look, historically, you just have to say Jesus was a remarkable person on any account. He was an exorcist, he was a miracle worker. You get the parables in the Gospel of Luke, you get the Sermon on the Mount, you get all these things. It's a sign that there's something truly remarkable here, right?
But is it so remarkable that we can say Jesus was indeed the Son of God, and that after his resurrection, he ascended into heaven, maybe from this exact spot?
And people have very often thought that this is the left foot of Jesus.
Right here.
Right here, exactly.
Stay with us. The story of the resurrection ends here, as does our journey at the Church of the Ascension, perched at the peak of the Mount of Olives.
What is the significance of where we are?
Mount of Olives is a place where Jesus was called into heaven, the Ascension. It is the highest place here in Jerusalem, and it is the place where from the first century on, Christian pilgrims came in order to worship the Lord, to worship Christ and see the Ascension.
The account, mentioned only in Luke's book of Acts, describes Jesus ascending to heaven in the presence of the disciples 40 days after his resurrection.
And the last remnant is, so to speak, his footprint.
So this is to commemorate his last presence on earth.
Absolutely.
The thing is, though, in the cultures of the ancient world, both pagan and Jewish, important figures ascended into heaven all the time. That's why skeptics argue the ascension was fabricated.
We know that there are some stories the Greco-Roman world of people ascending, that we would all call mythology. So is Luke writing something up? Is he taking a theological idea he has and turning it into a story?
It is a Jewish story that Jesus left from here into heaven. You see, Enoch, one of the first people created in this world by God, he disappeared. He went up to heaven. And another one we know, of course, is Elijah. Elijah went up into heaven. So that is very special people in the Jewish tradition went up into heaven.
But it doesn't exactly lend credibility to it, does it?
It does, in a way, because, you see, Elijah was regarded as a messianic figure, like Enoch is a messianic figure. So the Messiah is, in this tradition, supposed to be taken up to the Father in heaven again.
While there are some similarities, you can find similar details in just about anything, right? And let's just say the ascension didn't happen. Does that negate the resurrection?
There is one other explanation for the ascension, one that will surely strike some as blasphemous, but it does have some currency in the present day. It is that Jesus was an alien. Some have even suggested that paintings of the crucifixion include renderings of flying saucers.
Unpack the argument that it all makes sense if you believe that Jesus was an alien.
Well, I haven't wrestled much with it, but I mean, the appearances of Jesus, he was with them for over 40 days. That's not what you have with alien sightings. It's quick. There might be just a very short experience with them. That's what's typical of aliens. And most of those experiences with aliens are not pleasant ones, whereas those with Jesus after he rose from the dead, they were quite pleasant.
The assumption is there's an extraterrestrial world, extraterrestrial society, culture, who knows how to clad up as a human being, who knows how to heal people, who knows how to walk over water, and then who knows how to disappear, and then to appear again, if necessary, to show up with many people. What we know from the gospel is Jesus was a real man. Jesus was killed. He really died. And then he appeared again in a glorified way 3 days later with the apostles. So this is not an extraterrestrial human being, not an UFO coming from somewhere far away.
That's why we're here and not in Area 51 right now, having this conversation.
That's right.
So our investigation and our journey have come to an end, at least for now. But while questions persist about the resurrection, remember, new answers might be just one more excavation away.
Jerusalem is just full of caves and holes and burials, and by far not everything had been discovered yet. So whatever is be found, I think will only reconfirm the history of the faith in Jesus Christ.
Of course, for the faithful, no further proof is required. The mystery of Easter has already been solved in our hearts.
These are stones, but these stones are telling you the story. At the end of the day, the stones are telling you the story of the one who died and rose again.
So Easter is wonderful. Easter is, you look into a black hole, and you don't see anything. And suddenly this black hole changes, light comes out, and it engulfs you completely and the whole world. And this light is Jesus.
The story of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ cannot be dismissed as the stuff of mere myth. There are too many things that we know happened in a certain sequence reported by different people at different times the same way. But the true meaning of the story can only be answered by one person: you.